In the future, we're told computers will become much more helpful, pervasive and intelligent.
Look at how technology should be governed.
No, Deputy Speaker, I have to admit I didn't write that. In fact, no human wrote that. The AI large language model, ChatGPT, wrote that.
The artificial intelligence chatbot is currently banned in all public schools.
Almost half of all global jobs could be affected by artificial intelligence.
Artificial intelligence, or AI, has quickly gone from futuristic fantasy to a pressing issue facing governments, industries and workers globally. Legislators are now faced with the challenge of regulating an industry that could grow our economy by a third come the end of the decade, while fostering investment.
This is going to be as big as the internet, or possibly bigger. It's going to be, many people have compared it to fire or electricity. It is a very transformative technology. Many of those uses of AI are unproblematic and indeed very helpful. I mean, the fact that you get fewer spam emails today is courtesy of all the AI filters that are there.
In an interim report handed down today, the federal government is proposing voluntary guidelines for labelling AI for users, but experts say that will put Australia behind the pace set by the EU, US and China on regulation.
It's a little and it's a little late. There isn't much concrete, and much of it is in terms of voluntary agreements with industry. And as we've seen in the past, having them mark their own homework is perhaps not the best idea.
With proper regulation, the benefits will outweigh the risks, but it will also take massive investment.
As a comparison, last year when the UK government put out its similar AI safety report, looking at what sort of regulation and guardrails need to be put in place, they also at the same time announced another £1 billion investment to go on top of the already greater than £1 billion that the UK government had previously invested in AI, alongside that. And we have not seen that scale of investment. The Australian government has invested short of $200 million now in AI. We certainly can't just have a free-for-all. We certainly need to think carefully about the guardrails in which we can allow the innovation to happen.
Ed Husic, welcome to the program. We've just heard in that package that artificial intelligence looms as creating as big a change as the internet or possibly the use of fire in people's lives. But we've already got quite a lot of low-key applications of artificial intelligence in our lives, don't we?
Artificial intelligence has improved the quality of people's lives in different ways, in many respects that they take for granted, from the way they plan their daily journeys via Google Maps, or the discovery of new medicines, or the way in which we, for example, train ourselves. It's opened up new opportunities, but there are risks, and this is part of the point of what we're doing, particularly as AI has become a lot more powerful, a lot stronger. It's raised a host of questions about whether or not our legal frameworks are fit for purpose. Do we have modern laws for modern technology? That's what we are trying to do with the body of work that we've released today and the work that we've got to undertake through the course of this year.
So in this discussion you've launched about making AI safe, what are the sorts of high-risk applications that are of concern?
Well, for example, if in a clinical setting, if healthcare is using AI to make certain calls, what happens in those cases? Who's liable? If you're using a deep fake, using generative AI to create an image that looks so close to reality, are you engaging in false and misleading behaviour that might fall foul of consumer and competition law? Or another case might be if you're using creative content to train your AI and you've breached copyright, how do you manage that? There are a range of both physical and economic challenges and risks that have to get contemplated. The big thing is if it has an impact on people's safety, on their health, or a broader sense of impacting on people's future prospects, then there's an expectation that government will be able to, one, work out what those risks are, and two, have a response to those risks.
Well, submissions to the government's discussion paper say that at least 10 existing regulatory frameworks in areas like privacy and consumer protection may need to be amended. What are the sorts of regulatory issues that have been raised here?
I think some of the things that I've just mentioned a few moments ago about the uncertainty that might exist and whether or not legal action might be taken in the way in which AI is being used. I think there's also another element where people see the way that artificial intelligence can be used to drive automated decision making, and some people will think whether or not the technology, if I can put it in colloquial terms, will get ahead of itself, will do things in ways that we didn't expect or anticipate, and if there is a human impact for the way in which the technology works. So what we're trying to do in terms of the what we flagged in the release of our interim response today is to be able to say, look, we want to design voluntary safety standards right away and be able to work on that and be able to get industry to understand what they're supposed to deliver and how they're supposed to deliver it. And deliver then longer term through the setting up of an expert panel to guide government in creating mandatory guardrails that say on high risk areas where we think that there are certain things that the public will demand, that there are protections in place. What will those protections be around testing, transparency and accountability?
Well, you've just mentioned mandatory safeguards, but other countries have already started to legislate. It sounds like we're taking a pretty soft approach up front. What are the considerations here in making decisions about voluntary guidelines versus legislating?
Yes, you've seen the EU announce that they're going to develop and pass an AI Act, but they've still got voluntary commitments that'll be in place to guide them through the year. Canada, for example, has a similar sort of voluntary regime that's in place while it's still debating its legislation. And in the US, they're using executive orders, not necessarily going through Congress straight away, to get some things done. Similarly, we're trying to harmonise our approach where we can and localise where we should. And we've said we'll develop these voluntary safeguards in the interim while we're scaling up the mandatory guardrails that we think that the public believe will be important to give a sense of comfort and confidence in the way in which artificial intelligence is being used.
Foreign Minister Penny Wong is currently visiting the Middle East. We've committed $21 million extra in aid for Gaza, and the Minister has called again for a sustainable ceasefire. Initially, we wanted humanitarian pauses. What is a sustainable ceasefire?
Well, I think, in terms of the call for humanitarian pause, you're picking things from different points in time, which I understand why that's happening. But it's also a reflection of how things have evolved, Laura. We've recoiled from the horror of what we saw on October 7. We do need to see the release of remaining hostages that are being held by Hamas. That is important too. But we've also been impacted by some of the images of innocent Palestinians and the way that they've been affected, and particularly children. The impact on children has, for me personally, been one of the hardest things to see. And the stories that we've heard, children having to have limbs amputated without anaesthetic. You don't have to be a parent, you're a human. You hear that story, you're affected by it. And the humanitarian assistance to get through, the medical aid that will avoid those type of terrible circumstances, really important. So when you call for when you say, what's a sustainable ceasefire mean? It means that we've got a much longer pause in hostility, that we can get that humanitarian assistance in, that we can see the release of the hostages, and we can see some of the harder military action that has occurred in that space, in that part of the world, not persist. I think that's what, in many respects, is what's there. But the bigger, enduring, much more sustainable piece will come from Palestinians being able to have their own state, and that Israelis can feel secure in their own state. That's what we need to head towards.
You've also expressed your concerns about the domestic debate on Gaza, and you've spoken again today about a new McCarthyism with people targeted for their views in relation to the Gaza-Israel conflict. Do you feel that pressure yourself?
No, I've taken the view I will speak my mind. I'm here as a parliamentarian, not just as a cabinet minister, but as a parliamentarian at various points. I will speak because I think that we needed to get to a point where we were joining with other countries in calling for a ceasefire. Too many innocent Palestinians have lost their lives. Nearly 25,000, I think, people have lost their lives through the course of this conflict, and people should be able to speak up on behalf of humanity on either side, with respect to Israeli lives that were lost, but also the disproportionate number of Palestinians that have lost their lives. And if you're speaking up on that, on behalf of Palestinians who have borne such a heavy burden since October 7, why should you feel that your professional career might be impacted by that? I mean, I saw some of the reaction to actors who'd expressed their view at the Sydney Theatre Company, the way that journalists who'd call for a much more impartial coverage, the way that they were treated, the way in which doctors who had involved themselves in bringing petitions together, complaining against potential investigations by professional regulators into the work that they've done. I don't think that's right or fair, and you're seeing other actions that are now subject of court interventions. People in a democracy should be able to express their view. If they're doing it in a peaceful and considered way, that should happen. If they're not promoting hate speech, they should be able to speak up and be able to have their view. That's the beautiful thing about having a democracy in a nation like ours.
Ed Husic, thanks so much for your time tonight.
Thank you, Laura.